and asked, "Do we really want to do this?" After a couple of hours of further discussion, we all agreed to proceed. At the same time, we were told that the U.S. was conducting its largest ever war trainings in Honduras with 50,000 troops just across the border. On the day of our departure, March 23rd, a Miami Herald headline story, "Contras in training for major offensive," suggested the threat of a broadened war for the Nicaraguans. And the 1987 March issue of the Progressive magazine reported that a former U.S. Marine intelligence officer was providing the Contras with a list of civilians in Nicaragua marked for assassination. Nicaragua was definitely a terror zone on many fronts, thanks to Reagan's quote-unquote freedom fighters. And just a little side note here that's kind of related to that trip. While we were on the walk, President Ortega asked me if I would be willing to be picked up by a presidential jeep and taken to a town in Matagalpa for the annual coffee festival to give a speech, and then he would return me to the walk before we got to Huihuili, which was at the Honduran border. So I agreed to do that. And we got on the way to San Ramon, which was where we did the coffee festival. We encountered an ambush, which had just happened, and there were, I think, 9 survivors and 6 killed. And it was on Fantasma Mountain, where we had just walked the day before. So we were driving back to do this talk, and then going to be returning. So, and I picked up the U.S. M79 grenade shells along the road just as evidence. Upon arrival in San Ramon, I shared the podium with President Ortega and San Nujoma, the president of SWAPO, Southwest Africa People's Organization, who 3 years later became the first president of liberated Namibia. On our drive back north to rejoin the walk as it approached Huihuili, our route took us up, over, and down the treacherous, curvy Fantasma Mountain Road and past the ambush site of the previous day. Eager to join our other comrades walking to Huihuili, we kept driving after dark, turning out the Jeep lights to reduce our visibility and reduce our chances of becoming an ambush target. The driver carried an AK-47 under his seat, and another Nicaraguan soldier rode shotgun with an AK-47 at the ready. Holly, my partner at the time, and I, anxious and fearful in the back seat, closed our eyes and held our breath as we slowly rounded each hairpin curve. Anticipating instant death, we wondered if we would hear the crack of the rifles or feel the bullets as they entered our bodies. We realized that this is what the Nicaraguans experience every day throughout the rural areas of the country. That's just a little taste of, my evidence gathering of why I've been doing what I've been doing. And I'll just do one more reading about the day of the train, which was September 1st, '87. We've been vigiling at that site in Concord for 3 months, and there had been blocks of trucks carrying munitions on trucks parallel to the train, carrying munitions, and people had been arrested and jailed, and that base had witnessed blockades going back to the 1960s. It was not an unusual thing to be blocking trains and trucks at that base. I announced in the summer, in August, that I was going to begin a 40-day water-only fast on the steps of the I'd been on a fast on the steps of the Capitol a year earlier with 3 other veterans, where we were 47 days on water only, protesting Reagan's policy. So this is a year later, and I'm announcing that with 2 other veterans, we're going to fast for 40 days on water only, but not open-ended. And so we did. We took our position that day on September 1st, expecting basically to be arrested, which was the protocol. We began our vigil on September 1st a little after 10 a.m. with an ecumenical worship service on the tracks. Only a couple of news people showed up for the event, but 40 or 50 people came to support us. A personal friend, Bob Spitzer, a psychiatrist who was an amateur videographer, was there to document our arrest on video. A professional photographer acquaintance, Andy Perry, was present to make certain we had a good photographic record of the expected arrests and the formal beginning of our action. And then this is to continue a little bit what Dan Ellsberg said about that day. I shared my comments as I was getting ready to take my position. My hope is that today we will begin a new era of sustained resistance like the Salt March in India and like the Civil Rights Movement in the 50s and the 1960s, where people every day realize that we, the people, are the ones that are going to make peace. Peacemaking is full-time. War-making is full-time. And so my hope is that we will establish or create a kind of action here that revives the imagery of the sustained resistance of the past, such as in the Salt March and the Civil Rights Movement, where people are committed every day to say, as long as the trains move munitions on these tracks, we will be here to stop the trains. Because each train that goes by here with munitions that gets by us is going to kill people, people like you and me. And then, that was about 11 o'clock. At 11:40, Duncan Murphy, David Duncombe, the other two veterans, and I took our position between the rails. Two others, Ellen Earth and Michael Kroll, held a large banner across the tracks immediately behind us, which stated in bold letters, Nuremberg actions, complicity in the commission of a crime against peace, a war crime, or a crime against humanity is a crime under international law. All morning we had noticed a different mood on the base than there had been in the past 3 months when we had been there, while we had been there. David Hartsoe observed that at about 11:30 a.m., 2 truckloads of Marines armed with M16s and wearing flak vests drove within 50 feet of our vigil before driving away. This was highly unusual. At 11:45 a.m., a carload of Marines again drove near the vigil. One of them shouted to Hartsoe, "We hear there's going to be violence today." And there was a group of armed Marines who stood idly near our vigil, something that had not occurred since we started our presence on June 10th. Larry Raposa, the base fire chief, later admitted in a sworn statement to authorities that he had a bad feeling about this situation and had requested an engine company to respond from the inland fire station and stand by. As we sat on the tracks, we saw a train approach and stop. This is about 5 of 12. Nuremberg Actions organizers Bob LaSalle and Marilyn Coffey walked over to a base official who was carrying a walkie-talkie and appeared to be in touch with the train crew. When LaSalle reminded this man that demonstrators were still on the tracks, the man turned away and refused to listen before replying, "I think you're crazy. I'm going to do my job." A subsequent investigation revealed that this man's boss, the chief civilian security officer at the base, had told him, despite the absence of sheriff's deputies, that the train should be authorized to go ahead. We're going to have a confrontation. As LaSalle was walking back toward the tracks, he tried to communicate the same message to a nearby truckload of Marines when they remarked, "Well, there's going to be violence out here today," which was, news to us, but I was on the tracks. I didn't even hear those comments. I woke up 5 days later. And by the way, there's somebody in this audience that was a witness to that, and it's Mango, who's sitting right there. He was there as a 17-year-old kid from New Hampshire who had come out to join our vigil, and he's been living in Arcata for quite some time, and I was shocked to see Mango when I first moved here. I said, "Oh, Mango, you were there when I got run over." But what happened while I was in the hospital, 4 days later, on the Saturday of September 5th, 9,000 people showed up at the tracks and ripped up 300 feet section of the tracks. And they stacked up the railroad ties in a sculpture. And the police couldn't stop it because there was too many people. And so they just watched. And the trains didn't run for 12 days while they were repairing the tracks. But then a permanent encampment was created on the tracks, which stayed there as a permanent encampment day and night for 28 months. Every day, every train was blocked for 28 months. Every train, whether it was day or night, was blocked. Every truck, day or night, was blocked. So at least they couldn't keep moving these munitions without having to deal with real human beings who say, you can't move these munitions because they're basically murdering people, and we're here to defend our brothers and sisters, basically. So that was a kind of an interesting, you know, thing. You never know what's going to trigger